Well, thank you very much, Alex, for that kind introduction, and thank you very much to Yes Berwickshire for inviting me. And above all, thank you for coming, because this is a genuine public meeting about engaging with people who've not yet made up their mind, and hopefully we can impart some information that will help you make your decision in September the 18th. And I think it's fair to say that tonight's meeting in Eyemouth is one of hundreds. It's one of hundreds of Yes meetings that are taking place the length and breadth of Scotland as we build the biggest political grass movement Scotland has probably ever seen, and is certainly the biggest since the anti-poll tax campaign that Ash mentioned 25 years ago. It's that important and that's significance. And it's fair to say that this vote that we're going to take in September the 18th is the most important vote Scotland's had in 300 years. That's not to put any pressure on you. You've still got 100 days to go to make up your mind. But for me, working people in Scotland like us have an extraordinary opportunity on the 18th of September to break free of the chains that are imposed upon us by Westminster and establish our own country, our own democratic left-of-centre country that we want to establish. And I stand here as the Scottish Socialist Party's national spokesman, proud to be part of the Yes Scotland coalition. We stand for an independent socialist Scotland, and we have done for the last 17 years, because we're convinced that ordinary people like us will be better off with independence. That's the simple answer to the question, what is this all about? And I think people are entitled to a question like that being answered as straightforwardly as that. And I try in the beginning of my remarks to establish things that we already know to be the case. We already know that Scotland is a nation, don't we? Scotland is a country. We're a nation. We're not a province of anywhere else. We're not a province or a region of England, and we're not a region or a province of Britain either. We're a country, we're a nation. And all we're asking for in this vote on the 18th of September is the same democratic right that 260 other nations of the world already take for granted. It's that simple. And I'm a socialist, a trade unionist, have been all my adult life, and I like to make clear that supporting the democratic right of nations like Scotland to self-determination doesn't make you a Scottish nationalist. It makes you a democrat, because it's a democratic right that we're seeking to achieve. And the Scottish Socialist Party stands in the same tradition of John Maclean, the leader of the Red Clydesiders 100 years ago, who led the Red Clydesiders. And the most famous socialist that Edinburgh's ever produced, a man called James Connolly, who was executed by the British for his participation in the Easter Rising in Dublin in 1916. They're some of my heroes. And anybody who knows anything about John Maclean or James Connolly would never describe them as nationalists. They weren't. They were socialists. But they were passionate about independence for Scotland because they saw the progressive advance that was inherent within it. And that's the tradition that the Scottish Socialist Party and I stand within. It goes back 100 years, it goes back 200 years, to Burns and others. It's a noble and honourable tradition. And I want to say that independence means that working people, ordinary people like you and I, will be better off with independence. And how can I say that? Well, I can say that because Scotland, according to the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, based in Geneva, calculated that on the basis of the wealth that we create, divided by the 5.2 million people that live here, we'd be the 14th richest country in the world if we were independent. We'd be richer than the rest of the UK, we'd be richer in France, we'd be richer in Japan, the 14th richest country in the world. And why? Because like the wealthy, rich countries in the world, Scotland has a diverse array of industries that produce that wealth. We have oil and gas, yes. We also have world-class financial services. We have a renewable energy industry. If I point to the electricity, you know now that Scotland produces a third of its entire electricity output by renewables. We have world-class information technology industries, world-class construction, a world-class food and drink industry that includes, but not exclusively includes, the whisky industry, Aberdeen Angus, salmon, I could go on. We have a tourism industry that's profitable. We have public services that are profitable, and above all, you would forgive me for making clear as a socialist, our most precious asset is you. It's the people of Scotland that are our most precious asset. We've proven over centuries to be enterprising, to be hard-working, talented, learned. We gave the world the Enlightenment. We have shown that our greatest asset is our people itself. And for me, you can point to a vast array of industries, and we can point to the fact that we raise 9.8% of Britain's taxes, despite the fact that we only represent 8.4% of the population. The statistics are important, but I'm not going to give you them because I'm trying to convey a wider image than just the revenues and the statistics. And the only reason I mention this wealth that we know that we have is because on the other side of this debate, they would convey the impression to you that Scotland is some kind of economic basket case. We are subsidy junkies. We couldn't possibly stand on our own 2 feet if we weren't constantly bailed out by London and the southeast of England. And it's nonsense. It's total nonsense. And to me, it stands to reason when you think about it. If all the taxes you pay, if all the income tax you paid, all the national insurance contributions you made, all the VAT you pay in your shopping, all the duty on alcohol, tobacco, petrol, all the taxes we paid, corporation tax, capital gains tax, if all the taxes and levies that we paid stayed here in Scotland instead of being siphoned off by the UK Treasury, stands to reason we'd be better off, doesn't it? Stands to reason. And for me, the essence of this debate on independence is not about that at all. For me, it's perfectly clear Scotland would be wealthier. We'd have a great deal extra revenues. The kernel of this debate, for me, is about what we would then do with that extra revenue. Because Scotland in the 21st century belongs to Britain. We're part of Britain that is the 4th most unequal country in the entire world. The gap between the very rich and the poor, 4th worst in the entire world. And you've seen this for yourself a couple of weeks ago when the Sunday Times produced their annual rich list. Do you remember it? 10 people in Scotland, the top 10, with a combined wealth of £14 billion. 10 people. And that's a measure of these great, immoral, unacceptable inequalities that exist in our society. And when you bring the money down to communities like Eyemouth and counties like Berwickshire and spread it across Scotland, what's the consequence of this great inequalities? It means that Scotland is greatly scarred. It means that there are cities and towns and villages and communities in Scotland where 1 in 3 children live in poverty. 1 in 3 children who don't have the pair of shoes they should have in the winter. They wear the same trainers they wear in the summer. 1 in 3 kids who don't go on any school trips. 1 in 3 kids that are not properly nourished. In Scotland, in the 21st century, potentially the 14th richest country in the world. That's an outrage. It's an outrage. And it's never going to be solved by Westminster who don't give a damn. And equally, I was driving down, I stopped at Asda, Dunbar to get petrol. I buy the Berwickshire News to see what great coverage we're getting of tonight's meeting in the local paper. 0, as usual. But I noticed there's a story there about fuel poverty in the borders. For 60% of our elderly in this part of the world are living in fuel poverty. Fuel poverty in Scotland. We've got oil and gas in the North Sea. We've got renewable energy that produces a third. One of the wealthiest countries in the world, and a third of the population of this country can't afford gas and electric bills. Come on! We have 1,000 food banks in Scotland today. I grew up in Motherwell, as Alex was saying. My nana and my grandpa told me about the hungry 30s and the soup kitchens that they had to take them and their children to get fed. My granda was a steel worker, blacklisted in the 1930s, never worked for years. And they told us about the poverty of the soup kitchens, and people say, oh Colin, there's no such thing as poverty today anymore. We have 1,000 food banks in Scotland where people are turning up to be given a packet of cornflakes, a tin of corned beef, a tin of soup. And why? Because they don't have the money to feed themselves. And these are consequences of Scotland's attachment to the Westminster political regime. And I bring no excuses for bringing this and putting it in front of you. This is the reality. You know it's the case. We know it's the case. And therefore this debate about independence is about taking that great wealth and ending these outrages and scandals and shames and putting those youngsters and those senior citizens who worked their whole life for this country, they're first in the queue. And the top 10 who have £14 billion in the New Scotland, I'm afraid they'll have to wait their turn before everybody else gets the basic necessities of life provided from. These are the values we want to live by. These are our social democratic values in Scotland. We are in favour of redistribution of wealth. We are in favour of the rich paying more taxes than they do. It should be progressive. We are in favour of public ownership. We are in favour of keeping laddies in Berwickshire at home, not sending them to die in illegal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We are in favour of keeping the £100 billion that will otherwise be spent on a second generation of nuclear weapons based in Helensburgh to threaten the rest of the world with annihilation. We'd rather that £100 billion went to address the chronic shortage of affordable housing in this area, the chronic low pay that the Borders continues to suffer, lower wages than anywhere else in Scotland. These are the things that we want to use that money for. And the independence vote on the 18th of September allows us to say, do you know what? We can bring certain things to an end. We can bring that to an end that I've mentioned. We can bring to an end, there'll never be another Tory government in Scotland unless we vote for it. So the chances of that, in my opinion, are zero. We don't get governments that we don't want. We get governments that we elect. That's democracy. So a Scotland that was independent, there would be no bedroom tax. A Scotland that was independent, there would be no poll tax. There would be no privatisation of the Royal Mail, because we don't want it. There would be no Trident nuclear weapons. There would be none of the worst anti-trade union laws in the whole of Europe. We would reject all of that because we have different values. And it means at long last, we have our political right to elect governments that we want and see the policies and philosophies that we support being implemented. That's what this debate is about. And I wanted to finish my remarks by briefly touching on what the No campaign says to refute everything I've put in front of you. And there's three things they say. First of all, they do a more than passable imitation of Private Fraser for Dad's Army, who say, Colin, we're doomed, Captain Mannering. Our oil is worthless, our currency is useless, our pension's about to run out, we're too small, we're too poor, we're too stupid to run our own affairs. Colin, after the 18th of September, if there's a yes vote, the sun will never shine again in Scotland. That's the doom-mongering Dad's Army John Laurie impersonation. And then they go on and say, as Ed Miliband and Joanne Lamont and others will say, Scotland currently gets the best of all possible worlds. We have a strong parliament at Holyrood and vital influence at the top table at Westminster. That's the essence of the case, isn't it? If I do them justice, that's what they say. And of course, it's drivel. I was a member of the Scottish Parliament for 4 years. I can tell you my daily experience was to be told by the presiding officer, oh Colin, you can't talk about unemployment in here. Colin, you can't talk about the economy in here. Or you can't talk about the national minimum wage in here. You can't talk about low pay in here. You can't talk about equality for women and men in here. You can't talk about Trident in here. You can't talk about the war in Iraq or Afghanistan in here. That's for the big boys and girls at Westminster. You just keep playing with your toys. We don't have any power in the Scottish Parliament to address the issues we want. That's what this whole debate's about. And neither do we have vital influence at the top table at Westminster. Because if we did, we've made it clear we didn't want the bedroom tax, we got lumbered with it. We made it clear we didn't want the privatisation of the Royal Mail, they went ahead anyway. We made it clear we don't want Trident nuclear weapons based outside Glasgow, but they plough on regardless. So we clearly don't have influence at Westminster either. It's a double dip delusion. And I have to say, I've heard, and tends to be in the more circles in the Labour movement that I frequent, and they say, but Colin, look, you should wait for a Labour government. You should vote no in September and wait, and Ed Miliband, Red Ed, he'll come through next May. And your social democratic values, hey presto, Labour will deliver them all. And I show them where my head doesn't zip up the back. And I say, we had 3 Labour governments. We had 3 Labour governments. They were useless. They didn't listen to a thing that we said. Why would you wait in Ed Miliband? Ed Miliband's in favour of 90% of the cuts that the Tories want to implement. Ed Miliband voted for the welfare cap recently. It took Ed Miliband 6 months after the bedroom tax was introduced to come out against it. Why would you wait in Ed Miliband? We're wiser than that. And I want to say this to you, that independence is the only way we're going to advance our progressive agenda. That's the truth. We know that's to be the truth. And the kind of Scotland I want to see is one where nobody's left behind. In this wealthy, 14th wealthiest country in the world, there is no reason for anybody to be left behind. These grotesque inequalities don't happen by the fairies. They happen as a consequence of design policies for that particular end. I want to see a Scotland with full employment and a living wage for everybody who's working. A Scotland without the worst anti-union laws in Europe, where our public services are owned by the public. That's why they're public services. And I want to see a Scotland that's a modern democratic republic, where we have an elected head of state, representative of the people that they purport to serve. And I say that to you, full in the knowledge none of that's going to happen without a yes vote in September. None of it. And so I say in my final remarks, the message I want to convey to you tonight is, vote yes, of course, but get involved in Yes Scotland too, because we need your help. We need your help to persuade your family, your friends, your colleagues, your fellow students. Help us spread the word. And make sure that on the 19th of September, promise yourself this, that when you wake up on the 19th of September and Scotland has voted yes for independence, you can turn to your wife or your husband or your partner, your son or your daughter, your friends, your workmates and say, I did that. I changed the world forever. Thank you. Yeah.